I was bent halfway into the bed of my pickup, tugging at a cooler caked in dried mud and silently asking myself why I never learned to pack lighter for camping. When a sound cut through the quiet of the neighborhood that didn't belong there. It was sharp and flat, the unmistakable crack of skin hitting skin, and before my mind could even label it, my wife screamed my name. Not a startled yell, not surprise. It was pure fear, the kind that makes your stomach drop before your thoughts can catch up. I spun around on instinct, fast enough that the world blurred for a split second, and that's when I saw him. A man I'd never seen in my life was standing in our driveway, wearing a black tactical vest zipped tight across his chest. One of his hands was still raised, frozen mid-motion, as if he hadn't fully finished what he'd done. In front of him, my wife Emily staggered backward, her balance off, one hand pressed hard against her cheek. Tears were already streaking down her face, shock written into every line of her body. For a brief moment, everything collapsed into something small, tight, and ice-cold. My name is Mark Dalton. I was 38 years old at the time, active duty Army, a senior non-commissioned officer with just under 17 years in special operations. Most of those years were spent learning a very specific discipline: how to evaluate threats instantly, how to determine the exact level of force required, and how to apply precisely that amount, no more, no less. That training had saved lives overseas. In that moment, it was the only thing keeping that man alive, because every instinct in my body wanted to end him right there. I'm not some oversized movie version of a soldier. No massive shoulders, no action hero outline. I'm compact, dense, built from years of ruck marches and long deployments, functional strength, endurance, control. A body meant to carry heavy loads for miles and still think clearly afterward. None of that mattered in the 2 seconds it took for one simple truth to land. A stranger had just hit my wife in our own driveway while I stood 10 feet away. I let go of the cooler without realizing it and started moving toward them. I wasn't running. I wasn't shouting. I was walking with purpose, because discipline is what stops you from doing something irreversible when adrenaline is screaming for permanent solutions. Emily was holding her face now, her fingers trembling uncontrollably, her breathing shallow and broken. She's 5'5", maybe 120 on a good day, a middle school art teacher who spends her days breaking up arguments over colored pencils and reminding kids to wash paint off their hands before lunch. The idea that she posed a physical threat to anyone was absurd. The man who struck her was the opposite. Tall, heavy-set, late 40s, maybe early 50s, gray hair cut short. His vest radiated fake authority. Velcro patches, meaningless symbols, a laminated badge clipped just low enough to draw attention. In his other hand, he gripped a clipboard like it was something dangerous. And he wasn't alone. Another man, younger and broader through the shoulders, leaned casually against a dark pickup parked crookedly at the edge of our driveway. He watched with bored confidence, the kind that says he thought the situation was already under control. Step away from my wife, I said. My voice didn't rise. I didn't swear or threaten. I didn't need to. Years of issuing commands in places where hesitation got people killed had burned a certain tone into me, one that made grown men pause and reconsider without quite knowing why. The man with the clipboard finally turned to face me, and what I saw wasn't fear. It was irritation. "Sir," he said slowly, stretching the word like it was in charge, "your wife just assaulted an HOA enforcement officer. I defended myself using appropriate force. She's being cited for assault and obstruction." For a moment, I genuinely wondered if I'd heard him wrong. I looked at Emily, then back at him. My wife had a clear handprint spreading red across her cheek. She was crying, and this man was calmly justifying hitting her. "What happened?" I asked, stepping slightly in front of her now, not touching her, just placing myself between her and the 2 men like a wall. She swallowed, trying to steady herself. "I was getting the mail," she said, her voice shaking. "He stopped me and said we had violations. I told him we don't have an HOA and asked him to leave. He said I was interfering with official business." She took a breath that hitched halfway through. "When I took out my phone to call you, he slapped me. He said I was assaulting him by not cooperating." The man with the clipboard stepped closer, invading space like he was used to doing it without consequences. "I am Officer Nathan Crowley with the Brookstone Community Compliance Division," he announced. "Your wife became verbally abusive and physically aggressive when I attempted to issue citations. I used minimal force to defend myself. She is being detained until law enforcement arrives." Every word was smooth and rehearsed, carefully constructed to flip reality upside down and make violence sound like procedure. Something dark and heavy settled into my chest. This wasn't confusion. This was theater. I pulled my phone out and dialed 911 without taking my eyes off either of them. "This is Mark Dalton," I said when the dispatcher answered. "I'm at 418 Redwood Lane. A man just assaulted my wife by striking her in the face. The suspects are still on scene. I am active duty military." The tone on the other end changed immediately. "Sir, units are responding. Are you or your wife injured?" "My wife has visible facial injury. The suspect claims to be HOA enforcement. I'm maintaining visual contact and will not engage unless necessary to protect her. Officers are 2 minutes out. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary." Crowley's expression shifted when he heard the word military. Not fear or calculation. He angled his body toward the truck. "We're done here," he muttered, starting to walk away. I stepped sideways and blocked his path without laying a hand on him. "You're not leaving," I said evenly. "You assaulted my wife. You can explain your authority to the police." That was when his partner finally decided to move. The second man pushed off the truck and came toward me fast, shoulders squared, eyes locked in, a mistake born out of ego and the assumption that intimidation works on everyone. My training took over before emotion had any chance to catch up. I shifted my weight, redirected his forward momentum, and guided him to the ground in one smooth, controlled movement, secure his arms and placing him face down on the concrete in a restraint position so clean and efficient it barely registered as violence at all. The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds. "Do not move," I said evenly. "If you struggle, you will hurt yourself. Stay still." He did exactly that. Froze solid. Crowley froze as well. And for the first time since this started, I saw the realization hit both of them at once. They had chosen the wrong house. Now, before going any further, it's important to pause here, because what happened in that driveway wasn't random aggression. It followed a very specific pattern. And once you recognize that pattern, it becomes much harder for someone to manipulate you or the people you care about. Under normal circumstances, legitimate HOA enforcement does not look like this. Real homeowners associations do not send strangers in tactical vests to confront residents in their driveways. They do not detain people. And they absolutely do not use physical force. Ever. An HOA's authority is administrative, not physical. They send letters. They issue fines. They take disputes to civil court. The moment someone puts their hands on you, they are no longer enforcing rules. They are committing a crime. From a legal standpoint, what Crowley claimed was complete nonsense. Even if an HOA had existed, refusing to accept a citation or pulling out a phone is not assault. Words are not assault. Non-cooperation is not assault. And striking someone to force compliance is never justified outside extremely narrow law enforcement circumstances, which HOA officers are not part of. But what really matters here isn't just the law. It's the psychology behind it. This is a psychological trap, and it works far more often than people realize. The vest, the badge, the confident delivery, the clipboard, all of it is theater. It's designed to trigger obedience, especially in polite people, spouses, or anyone who wants to avoid conflict. When that compliance doesn't happen, the script flips. Suddenly, the victim becomes the aggressor, and the attacker recasts himself as the official defending his authority. That role reversal creates confusion, fear, and hesitation, which is exactly what people like this rely on. Most victims freeze. Most apologize. Most give in. The only reason it failed here is because there was a witness who understood authority, restraint, and documentation. And that matters, because what came next only happens once the lie collapses under real scrutiny. The sound of sirens cut through the tension before anyone else spoke. Faint at first, then rapidly approaching, urgent, unmistakable. I felt my shoulders drop just slightly, not because the danger was over, but because now the situation was about to be observed by people with real badges and real authority. The man restrained beneath my hands hadn't moved. A smart decision. His breathing was fast and shallow, adrenaline dumping hard now that he realized intimidation had failed. Crowley stood near the edge of the driveway, clipboard hanging uselessly to the side, eyes darting between me, Emily, and the street as if searching for exits that no longer existed. Emily leaned against the truck, still holding her cheek, still shaking but upright. That mattered more to me than anything else in that moment. 3 patrol cars arrived almost simultaneously, tires crunching over gravel, doors opening in practice unison. One officer stepped out first, hand resting near his holster, eyes calmly taking in the scene with the confidence that comes from experience, not nerves. "Who's Mark Dalton?" he asked. "I am," I said, keeping my hands visible. "I have one suspect restrained. The other assaulted my wife." He nodded once, already reading the body language, the lack of chaos, the controlled scene. Another officer moved toward Crowley, guiding him away firmly but without force, while a third approached Emily. "Ma'am, are you injured?" he asked. She lowered her hand from her face, and the mark was unmistakable now, a red imprint already darkening and swelling. "Yes," she said quietly. "He slapped me." That was all it took. Crowley started to speak, launching into his rehearsed explanation, but the officer cut him off without even looking at him. "Sir, turn around. Put your hands behind your back." "What?" "No, you don't understand," Crowley protested. "She assaulted me. I was defending myself. I'm with community compliance." "You can explain it later," the officer said flatly. Cuffs already in hand. "Right now, you're under arrest for assault." The metallic click echoed louder than it should have. Once Crowley was secured, another officer approached me. "Sir, you can release him slowly." I complied immediately, stepping back with my hands raised again. The man on the ground was cuffed without resistance, his earlier confidence completely gone. Once the scene was secure, everything shifted into documentation mode. Statements, photographs, measurements. Emily's cheek was photographed from multiple angles. The driveway, the truck, the vest, the fake badge. A supervisor arrived, then a detective, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and the calm authority of someone who has seen every variation of human nonsense imaginable. She introduced herself and then looked at me. "Active duty?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "What unit?" I told her, and her eyebrows lifted just slightly. "All right," she said. "Then we're doing this by the book." She explained that any time an alleged crime involves impersonation, organized fraud, or targeted harassment, it triggers a broader investigation. And when the victim is part of a military family, that review expands even further. Before the suspects were even transported, she was already on the phone coordinating with county investigators. By the time a tow truck arrived to impound their pickup, it was clear this wasn't their first stop, not even close. Over the following weeks, the full picture came together piece by piece. Crowley wasn't an HOA officer. There was no Brookstone Community Compliance Division. The vest, the badge, the clipboard, props, they'd been running the same scheme across multiple neighborhoods, targeting areas with high turnover, rentals, and military families. People more likely to assume they'd miss some rule or paperwork. Sometimes they pressure homeowners into paying on-the-spot fines. Other times, like with Emily, they escalated when challenged, counting on fear and confusion to carry them through. They just hadn't planned on a witness who understood restraint. Legally, the case escalated fast. Assault, impersonation, fraud, conspiracy. Then the aggravating factors started stacking up. Use of force, targeting vulnerable populations, prior complaints that suddenly mattered once someone had finally stopped them in the act. 8 months later, we were sitting in a courtroom that smelled faintly of old wood and recycled air. Emily squeezed my hand as the prosecutor walked the jury through the timeline, calm and precise, peeling away every excuse Crowley's defense tried to cling to. Emily had gone to get the mail. She had asked him to leave. She had taken out her phone. He had slapped her. That was the entire story. No threat, no escalation, no justification. When Crowley took the stand, he claimed he felt unsafe, that he was intimidated, that his reaction was instinctive. The prosecutor never raised her voice when she asked him to explain how a 120-pound art teacher holding a phone represented a physical danger. He didn't have an answer that made sense. Emily testified next. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied as she spoke about the confusion, the shock, and the moment she realized the man in front of her wasn't an authority figure at all. Just someone wearing authority like a costume. When it was my turn, I kept it simple. No drama. I explained what I saw, what I heard, the decisions I made, why I didn't strike him, why I called the police, and why I restrained his partner without causing injury. I talked about discipline. The jury didn't deliberate long. Guilty on every count. When the judge read the sentence, double digits, state time, no early release, I felt something finally settle inside me. It wasn't satisfaction or revenge. It was closure. Months later, life mostly returned to normal. Emily went back to teaching. I went back to work. The driveway looked like any other driveway again. One night over dinner, she reached across the table and took my hand. "You know," she said quietly, "when he slapped me and I looked over and saw you standing there, I knew he'd made a terrible mistake." I smiled faintly. "Because you knew I'd hurt him?" She shook her head. "No, because I knew you wouldn't." That stayed with me, because the lesson here isn't about strength. It's about control. It's about knowing when to act and when to let the system do exactly what it's designed to do. Crowley is still in prison, and he learned something a lot of people never do. Real authority doesn't need a costume, and real justice doesn't come from violence. It comes from accountability. When people hear this story, the question I get most often isn't about the fake HOA, the sentence, or even the scam itself. It's this: how did you not lose it? I understand why they ask. On paper, this looks like a moment where rage would be justified. A stranger hits your spouse, lies about it, doubles down, and tries to walk away like he owns the ground beneath his feet. Every instinct, especially if you've been trained to use force, tells you to end the threat immediately. But the lesson is this: restraint isn't weakness. It's leverage. People like Crowley don't rely on strength. They rely on impulse. They count on emotional reactions, because once that happens, the story gets messy. Once you throw a punch, everything becomes complicated. Once you cross that line, they aren't just attackers anymore. Suddenly, they're victims too. That's the trap. And it's a psychological trap that works far more often than anyone wants to admit. Authority theater, fake confidence, official sounding language. All of it is designed either to force compliance or provoke mistakes. Both outcomes benefit the manipulator. What breaks the trap is clarity. Calling the police, saying things out loud, staying visible, letting neutral witnesses document reality before it gets rewritten. From a legal standpoint, everything that followed, the expanded investigation, the added charges, the enhanced sentence, only happened because the incident stayed clean. There was no ambiguity, no mutual combat. No, he said, she said. Just evidence. That's what people miss. Justice doesn't move fastest when emotions burn hottest. It moves fastest when facts are preserved. Now, let's talk specifically about HOA scams, because this wasn't a one-off. These schemes exist everywhere, especially in areas with renters, retirees, and military families. If someone claims to represent an HOA, there are a few non-negotiable rules to remember. First, HOAs do not enforce rules in person like police, ever. They send written notices. They schedule hearings. They document everything. If someone shows up demanding immediate compliance, that's your first red flag. Second, no HOA employee has authority to detain you, threaten you, or touch you. The moment physical force enters a situation, it stops being civil and becomes criminal. According to standard procedure, the correct response is simple. Don't argue. Don't comply. Don't escalate. Ask for written documentation. Take out your phone. Call the police if they refuse to leave. And finally, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it usually is. What stayed with me most wasn't the trial or the sentence. It was what Emily said months later, that she didn't feel safe because I was stronger, but because she knew I would stay in control. That's not just a military lesson. It's a life lesson. Control gives you options. Options lead to outcomes. And outcomes are what actually change things. Crowley wanted dominance. What he got was accountability. That's why this story matters. Because not every victory looks like a knockout. Sometimes it looks like a phone call, a steady voice, and the patience to let the system expose someone who thought they were untouchable. If you've ever dealt with HOA harassment, fake authority, or intimidation tactics, share your experience in the comments. These stories help others recognize the signs before things escalate. And if you're part of a military family or any family, remember this. Document everything. Involve the right authorities early. And don't let anyone convince you that standing your ground means losing control. Real power isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about knowing when you don't have to. If you found this story helpful or eye-opening, consider subscribing. We talk about real situations, real consequences, and real lessons people often learn too late. And as always, stay aware, stay calm, and don't let anyone wear authority like a weapon against you.